Greetings and welcome everyone to episode number 8 of the Creative Outlet Podcast. As always, my name is Brandon Pudwell, your host for the good old COP on March 5th, 2021. And man, already the spring semester is off to a better start than the fall semester, considering that I'm actually recording something that's within the middle of the semester. So clearly that means school is probably doing a little better. I wouldn't say it's going a lot of better, but it's at least going a little better. And part of that has to do with like, hey, I have at least one fewer class that I have to do this semester than last semester's, because then that helps the numbers even out as far as how many credits I would need year on year. Right now I'm looking at getting to around the average 30 per year. And as far as like the actual classes themselves, I mean, they're pretty interesting. But with every semester, I find there's always something that just does not plain Jane make sense. So, for example, I've talked about I'm pursuing a political science degree. We can make jokes already about how useless that sort of thing is, but, I believe in the inherent value of education. I'm sorry, I'm getting off on a tangent here. The point is, things that don't make sense with classes or with degrees and such. And would you ever think that for a social sciences degree, even if we, acknowledge that it is social sciences, that you'd ever need to know how to code? I didn't think I would need to know how to code for my degree. That is, like, I thought I would be doing, actual just, like, studying of things, as far as, like, the concepts. Like, this is what this country does. I mean, I imagine I would need to look at data. I didn't think I would need to code data. So that's a strange thing. And, there's always the ever classic class that like where the professor doesn't do much, but you're expected to do a lot. And, for me, that's astronomy. I mean, I guess in practice I really don't have to do a ton, but he's kind of run into the same problem that one of my professors the last semester had too, which is having the most dry, boring lectures to have to sit through. It's not fun. Well, and then, speaking of weird things, like a weird thing that happened with that class in particular is just like, usually you expect everything to be set out by the first week. Like, okay, this is when we're gonna do these things, and here are all the things you need to be available for. Especially with an online class, if, it's important to know, do I need to be available at this particular day and time of the week? No, instead we're gonna start having a live section during the 5th week of class. What? Why? It was bizarro to me, because already I had gone through just about, well, I guess at that point it would have been approximately a third of the class, and it's like, okay, I basically just have to do these assignments and, watch the lectures and read the stuff, and I should be fine. Especially because, it was weird because I had planned at the start of the semester that's like, I would have to go to this live thing. And then when we didn't do it for the first 4 weeks, I didn't think there would be a live thing. And lo and behold, all of a sudden there's a live thing. Weird. Professors, make sure everything is set out at the start of the class. That's the bottom line here. If a lot of my other feedback is too much to ask for, that is certainly not too much to ask for. I do have a production update. Before I do that, I think I want to touch on a couple of other fun things that I didn't have written here. Mostly like, background items. I'm sure everyone sees, if they're watching the video version of the podcast on youtube.com rather than listening to it at anchor.fm/THECOP, they can see that there is more amiibo in the background. And indeed, there are some that are off to the side here that you probably can't see. They might be trailing off into the distance, and That's always an exciting sort of thing to see the collection continue to grow. I promise these will eventually get out of the boxes. It just comes down to, when am I going to have a more permanent place of residence post-college, once I finally have, like, a job where it's just me living in a place where I can trust that nothing's going to happen to my amiibo figurines. Speaking of other things, I really wish I could figure out a better angle for this. Like, even if I could just move the camera back like another foot or two, because I do have some nice, like, things in front of me that you just can't see because I'm trying to get a nice background with all this stuff in it, but I can't show off some of my fun stuff. And speaking of fun stuff, this is a recent purchase I got that whenever I get a bigger space, or, well, at least a space that I can more densely pack, I hope to put in the background. So let me just pull it up here. Those of you in the audio world won't be able to see it, obviously, because audio is not visual, but I will have to describe it to you. This, if I can try to get it decently enough, is the 40th anniversary Pac-Man quarter-sized arcade cabinet from, they keep rebranding the name of the store, but I think now it's Just Geek as of March of 2021. But the brand that does all of this stuff is Numbskull, and that's something that I hope to get in the background. I've tried it out a teeny-weeny bit, and, I mean, it's Pac-Man, so it's kind of hard to screw up Pac-Man, other than not including the arcade ROM, but they did, because it's an arcade machine. So that's something that I hope to get in the background. I think I've always wanted something like that. I mean, really, I think every gamer wants to have a full-size cabinet, but I'm not quite that ridiculous. But if I can have a tiny one, that's cool. But I guess I should get into the serious meat and potato piece of this introduction, which is the single production update. And I kind of jokingly talked about it at the start of here, but clearly one of the main problems with the good old COP during the semester time is, basically doesn't exist. It only really exists during not semester time. Let's put it like this. I'm 6 weeks into the semester, just about to enter the 7th, just about halfway, and finally I get to make another episode. So since the summer is going to be coming up, we're in March now, summer's just about, 2-3 months away, and I swear that this summer I'm going to have time available, because, now I'm prepared for a COVID-19 ridden summer compared to last year. I've had an idea tossing around in my head, and trust me, this is probably going to sound confusing at first, so bear with me. I'm not sure. I want to have some sort of visual that might make this a little clear. If this doesn't happen in this episode, there will be a visual prepared for the first summer episode that better explains this. So every week, as far as my actual working at an employer schedule, I want to block off 2 days that from working there. I'm assuming it's going to be Monday, and then it's either going to be Thursday or Friday. And the reason I want to do that is I want to leave those days for two purposes. One, I want to do some more exercise on those days, because, I think I talked about it a little bit in episode 7 here, which is that, everyone around the new year wants to exercise a little more. I've got this, set of pedals you can't see over here that I've been kind of using when I'm able to do so. But, I want to do more serious exercise as far as, hey, when it's warm and there's no more snow on the ground, actually, seriously, maybe going on a bike. What a novel idea, right? And I was also thinking, I've been wanting to get back into doing golf, and that would, of course, actually have me using my arms a little bit. And it's mostly walking, too, which is still good. But, it's a nice, slower-paced sport. It's better for Brandon to do that, especially with, asthma and allergies and all that stuff. But I'm getting off track. That's not the important part. The important part is how that affects the podcast. So on those on that Monday, and I'm going to decide Thursday or Friday when the time comes. The other thing I want to do though on those days is podcast work. And the goal that I have for me is to set out, is to have bi-monthly episodes, by which I mean an episode should come out once every 2 weeks. And that word is BS, but that's beside the point. Link to the video that I'm trying to reference here as a card, I'm sure. But the reason I want to have 2 days off is because I plan to record 2 episodes in a single week. And that might sound confusing, like, okay, well, why are we having an episode come out every 2 weeks if you're recording 2 episodes, right? And the reason for that is I want to make, okay, hold on, I'm missing a piece of the puzzle here. Okay, so we've got our Monday and our Thursday or Friday where I record 2 episodes, right? And in that week, that's the recording week. The following week is an editing week. And the reason I want to record 2 episodes is so that episode that I'm recording on Monday releases that following week by the end of it. And then that episode that's from Thursday or Friday, the idea there is I want to have a set of more themed, not newsy type episodes that I can have as a backlog to release during the fall semester. Okay, so if we're on Monday here, I'm going to record, like, here's a new episode with news and information in it, and potentially just themed topics, just for the sake of it, that are shorter, that will come out in the near future. And then a couple days later, I'm going to record one of these themed episodes. So, like, I've got a list of 5 ideas in my head so far. I need at least 7, because the goal for the fall semester is to keep doing that, like, 2-week schedule. And it works out because, a college semester is 14 to 16 weeks, so I would have just about enough to get me through the fall semester for sure. If I just preview one of these ideas, there's like, I have 4 anniversary themed episodes, because they're like, I did not realize how many things happened in years ending in 1 or 6 that were important for me as a video gamer. So one of these ideas I had rolling around in my head as an anniversary episode is to do an Ace Attorney themed episode, because this year is the 20th anniversary. The game came out in October 2001 in Japan, but I would just record, like, the topics, or, like, the segments and the conclusion, because one of the things I was thinking about was, well, if I record the introduction and I'm talking all throughout this about something, and then something along the way changes, like, so far, as of today, March 5th, there is no news about what's happening for the Ace Attorney 20th anniversary, or if there is going to be anything at all. But if I were to record that in June or July or whenever the heck it gets recorded, and then by the time I release it in October, all of a sudden we have, like, a new collection, and I'm talking all throughout the episode about, like, yeah, there isn't even, like, a collection of 4, 5, and 6 on modern consoles, and then all of a sudden there is, I'd want to have that intro, like, a brand new intro that I record the week that, or, like, the week before it's going to come out, to be like, hey, just so you know, I'm talking all throughout this, about like, X has not happened, but now I have news that this has happened, okay? So that way, it's like, if there is news that I want to talk about, I can include that, and then I can just update any outdated information. And then, of course, like I said, like, the main benefits of doing this sort of thing bi-monthly over the course of the semester is that if I have a week set aside for editing, that means I can, like, I mean during the summer, if I have that week set aside for editing, it's like I can put everything together, except for the intro and the video and the audio versions, like, really quickly, and then I'd already have the segments edited all together, so I can just hopefully pretty easily put all that stuff out by the time the fall semester comes around. And clearly I don't really, I've said this many times, I don't really have an audience right now that where I can put this out as like a poll, like, hey, does this sound like a good idea, or how do you feel about it? But this, yeah, I've workshopped it to people around me. I've kind of explained it and heard what they think, and I think it's a good idea because I would rather have something come out during the fall rather than have nothing come out during the fall, even if it's not doing things exactly the way that I would want to do it, which is doing the entirety of production in like a span of a week or two, right? And then the other problem with it too is that it isn't. I can't exactly replicate that for the following spring semester because the winter break is only 4 weeks long, so I'd only be able to record a maximum of 4 episodes, and that's assuming that I wouldn't release any during the winter break either. So, at the very least, the idea is that should get me through the rest of 2021, unless, something else in the world goes completely haywire, like the apocalypse. But I don't intend on that happening. But with all that said, I think we're ready to go into the topic rundown for this episode. We're going to be talking about God, I can't speak, apparently. We're going to be discussing Pyra and Mythra, who are the brand new characters added to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. They were quite literally revealed, or at least they had their whole detailed presentation yesterday. I wanted to do a beginner's introduction to choosing the game hardware for you. So just an intro into hey, here's kind of what I would recommend if you're just starting to get into gaming. I had an idea for a segment that I occasionally want to do on the best and worst of board games, because I was thinking about it, where it's with Clubhouse games. Clearly, I did not realize how much I do enjoy just classic style tabletop games. I don't really like playing them in person so much, or at least I haven't during my teen years. I'm hoping that might change as I get older, I'm not sure. But today I want to do a discussion on what I think is one of the worst of board games, and that is the game of Sorry. And finally, I want to give a discussion on my experiences with a new collection I've built. You're not going to see it here, but trust me, there will be footage of it. I have started a small record collection. I'm not entirely sure also, I guess, what B-roll is going to look like for all of these, especially for the Smash one, because I can't record Smash footage. I'm sure people who've watched the segments have noticed that there's a distinct lack of B-roll, but because I don't have a capture card, but thankfully the Switch at least has its built-in capture function. But I guess I'm getting a little off track here. Suffice to say, there's going to be some B-roll, and I have a special idea for B-roll during the last couple of topics. But I guess if there's really any benefit to having a trouble with B-roll, is that it makes editing this a whole lot more quicker. It makes it a lot easier for the episode to come out. Anyway, we should move directly into today's topics. Now, I think this is what I was trying to say when I was going into that topic rundown immediately, and it's that I promise you, faithful listeners, that I am not trying to structure my episode releases around when Sakurai decides to do another character presentation, because I have noticed, I swear most of my episodes come out right around then, or at least I've incorporated the topic of so-and-so has been revealed for Smash Brothers. I just want to cover all of these. In fact, I would imagine that either sometime soon or when all of the Super Smash Bros. Ultimate presentations are finished, there's only 2 more after this, that there's going to be a playlist of all Smash-related segments on the Creative Outlet podcast, so take a look out for that. But I guess I would rather start by thinking this is a bit of a 2-for-1 topic as well, because just like with the direct drought topic that I did in episode 7, Pyra and Mythra were revealed in the newest full-length Nintendo Direct, just like how there was a Mario Direct right around when I wanted to talk about the Direct drought. And so I guess I want to open this first before talking about the characters themselves by giving some, like, what were my highlights in the Direct. I really don't want to cover the whole thing because there's a lot. Honestly, for as kind of like I was talking about in the Direct drought segment, while people are looking for these super mind-blowing moments in every Direct, I generally find that they're all about a similar quality, which is a couple of mind-blowing moments, but otherwise I could skip the rest. And that's kind of how this one was too. But I guess when I was writing it out, I really didn't realize how many great things there were, in my opinion, in the whole Direct. So let's talk about like some tiny things that were in it. There was an expansion pass announced for Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. I really haven't talked about the game, but that's because I don't own the game, and really I don't intend on owning a game. We can talk about my opinions on Zelda and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild specifically in one of those themed episodes for the fall, actually, because this is the Legend of Zelda 35th anniversary. But we'll talk about that then. Okay, another one of those tiny things that I wanted to touch on. So there's a game that was revealed. It was teased with a certain scale. Looks like a certain scale of justice. And I tell you, my hype went suddenly like, oh, is this what I think it is? Are we looking at Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney 7? And then, bam! They had to go and ruin it, because it turns out it's Project Triangle Strategy, which, to be clear, I know I'm not the only person who loves Ace Attorney who was getting super excited during that moment, who felt kind of, how would I put it, that got bamboozled. But I'm sure Project Triangle Strategy is going to be a great game, and I'm glad to see Square Enix continuing on this. Apparently, they're calling it the HD 2D style of game. I haven't really played it because, kind of like I talked about in the last episode, I'm not a super duper huge RPG person. They're great and all, but I'm not. I don't really intend on getting Project Triangle Strategy, which hopefully has a better name in the end. Other than that, that was a moment that stuck out to me because, man, was I excited, and man, did I end up being disappointed. We also finally got more details on the Animal Crossing New Horizons Super Mario crossover stuff. And I've been playing around with it so far. I mean, it's mostly just, hey, order some furniture and some clothes. Although the really, honestly, the genius addition in this update are the warp pipes. And I guarantee you I'll be setting up at least 5 warp pipes around my island as fast travel, even though I know that once you set up more than 2, it randomly picks one for you to go. I just like the fast travel using a pipe rather than, actually having to run around. But that's just me. Otherwise, I mean, it's really not anything that's like super duper amazingly different for Animal Crossing. It's just some Mario stuff in the game. There's a segment that I missed, and then I just haven't been really able to go back at it that I actually want to check out, which is the World's End Club portion. It's a game that I'm curious about because it sounds like it's by the same, or like by at least the same company that did the Zero Escape series, and that's a series that I've wanted to try, since, it's a visual novel, not exactly in the vein of Ace Attorney, but, just, it's another visual novel series that I wanted to try out, and it sounds like there's going to be some elements of that in there. I'm sorry, I apologize. I'm talking about something that I know nothing about, but let's just say, for something that I know nothing about, I still have my interest piqued, which should be a good thing. But we'll see how that turns out in practice. So that's all the tiny, itty-bitty-bitty things. But now I want to go into, like, the big, mind-blowing moments from that Direct. And I'm going to start by getting the controversial take out of the way. I am cautiously pessimistic about Splatoon 3. So if you haven't watched it, which why are you listening to me talk about this if you've not watched this Nintendo Direct, the final reveal in it was the announcement of Splatoon 3. And there is genuinely one thing that would have had to change about this announcement for me to be equally as mind blown as everyone else. And that is if it were not coming to Switch. So, I mean, I guess this is kind of just a factor or an element of being spoiled with first-party Nintendo games, but generally speaking, each series, or at least each major series, gets one entry on each piece of hardware. I mean, with some exceptions, there's more than one mainline Mario game on a lot of systems. There's more than one mainline Zelda game on systems. I mean, the Wii sticks out. It had The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess and The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword. It had Super Mario Galaxy and Super Mario Galaxy 2. Okay? So it's not unheard of for a game in the same series to have two installments. Splatoon is a slightly different case. Now, I mean, yeah, it's only had one entry on the Wii U, and currently one, now soon to be 2 entries on Switch. But the difference between something like Splatoon and something like Zelda is that in Zelda, you're getting a completely new and unique adventure. In Splatoon is an online shooter, so unless they go completely in a 100% different direction, the experience you have playing Splatoon 2 is going to be pretty similar to the experience you have playing Splatoon 3. It's the same reason why you haven't seen 2 Mario Karts on the same console, because, what's the point? What will be the point of playing Mario Kart DS when there's just Mario Kart DS 2 on the same system? That could be better in every single way. And, I'll readily admit, part of my cautious pessimism about Splatoon 3 is because, I think I've made it pretty clear, especially when talking in past segments, why do I collect a certain segment of games, which is I care about the legacy of what these games are going to have. So, I can feel fine getting Splatoon 2 back in 2017 when I already have Splatoon 1 on the Wii U, because Splatoon 2 is only on Switch. Splatoon 1 has its own separate legacy to Splatoon 2, because without Splatoon 2, you wouldn't be able to play that series on Switch. Does that make sense? I don't know if it's super clear, if it seems super well thought out, but suffice it to say, I'm excited for Splatoon 3 in the sense that, of course it's exciting to get another game in the series, but I really want the team to prove my pessimism about it wrong. I want them to show that, yes, there is a good reason for there to be 2 Splatoon games on the same console. And I am confident that they can prove me wrong. But we'll just have to see what happens. There were already some kind of rumblings, based on what I saw, that piqued my curiosity. That maybe this will be different enough. Specifically, they start by jetpacking onto the stage. If there's a unique mode in it, or if they make this about airborne turf wars or something, to me that would be a sufficiently different reason to own Splatoon 3 over Splatoon 2, because I could still go back to Splatoon 2 and have the experience of playing on land turf wars. I'm sure they're not going to do that, but I would like to see something that's big and different like that justifies Splatoon 3 as a separate and important entry from Splatoon 2. Or no, the other way around. I would like to see something that makes sure that if I were someone 10 years in the future right now, that I would feel justified in purchasing both Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 3. But we'll see what happens. I'm confident they can do it, but I have to take my enjoying Nintendo games goggles off sometimes, and really ask myself, like, well, is this really a good thing to be happening right now? And Splatoon 3, I think, is a perfect case of that. We're also finally getting another Zelda game that I'm willing to get. Again, Zelda opinions will be reserved for the Zelda themed podcast this coming fall. But I'm going to be talking a little bit about Skyward Sword HD. Now, I have The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword on the Wii, but I've hardly played it. And that comes down to, again, I'm pretty sure I talked about this a bit in episode 1, I have a horrible track record with finishing console games because I just don't sit down to play games on a console. I much prefer playing video games in handheld format or in a mixture, which is what's great about the Switch. I think I could actually pick up and finish The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword with the HD version on Switch. Because, what are the Zelda games that I have finished, or have come really close to finishing so far, are The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time 3D on the 3DS. Am I about halfway, or am I only about a quarter of the way? I want to say... No, I'm about halfway done with Majora's Mask 3D. Of course, no, I can't find my 3DS anywhere, so I can't really make any good progress in it. And I am just about finished with A Link Between Worlds on the 3DS as well. Those are all games that I've come close to finishing. As far as console Zelda titles, there's not a single one that I've come close to finishing, whether it's Wind Waker HD, I haven't even started Twilight Princess HD, I've barely scratched the surface of Skyward Sword, which is the focus of why I would be willing to pick up the HD version here. I also like that they're not going to require me to use the motion controls. Like, I'm sure the experience I had with the motion controls in the Wii version are perfectly fine, but again, I haven't played it enough to really give a good enough opinion on those, and I don't really want to sit down and play it on the Wii at the moment. So that's Skyward Sword. There was an announcement. This is the very rare, like a twice in a lifetime moment, I would say. They announced the rare independent game sensation, or like global gaming sensation, that I might pick up. I'm actually really interested in picking up Fall Guys on Switch. Shocking, as someone who would not get into the hype of games like Minecraft back in the day, or Call of Duty, that I'm like, yeah, maybe this thing that bazillions of people are playing, I would want to pick up. And, this is just because, hey, it's in the genre I like the most. Platformers. It's a 3D platformer. It's kind of a party game, too. And I know that Lex, who was my guest on the first Creative Outlet bonus, unintentional Creative Outlet bonus, but still a pleasant thing to have around. She has it on the PC, and she hasn't played it a ton, but she wanted me to try it out, and, the little bit I played, I enjoyed, so I would be willing to pick it up again on Switch, or pick it up for myself, I should say, on Switch. There's a game that was revealed that was interesting to me, with an absolutely horrible reveal, and the other reason I can't believe, actually, that I'm interested in this game is because it's an EA game, and that was Knockout City. Now, this is actually a segment that I also had to skip over, kind of like World's End Club, just because, the Direct only had to air during a class and right before I had to go to work, so I had to basically catch up on it at double speed to see what I wanted to see and skip over what I didn't really care about at the moment. But it seems like it's like a dodgeball type game. That's always a game that I've wanted to have as like it's like a first person shooter sort of game, as a dodgeball game. And it looks like it could be fun. But it just had an absolutely horrible reveal with all of these different stereotypes of like what a gamer is. Like, I'm the girly princess gamer. I'm the grr hardcore RPG gamer. The soldier. It was just a weird, strange trailer. But it looks fun. Like the actual like little teeny bits of gameplay I've seen, it looks like it could be fun. Something that came almost out of nowhere, but I'm very interested in, was the Famicom Detective Club duology. Again, gives me Ace Attorney vibes, even though this came like 20 years before that almost, or probably more like 15 years before Ace Attorney. It certainly looks a lot more horrific, like a lot more Resident Evil than Ace Attorney, but it looks like it could be fun. I'm gonna be interested in picking those up. It looks like there's a physical Japanese version, so if that works in English, that'd be great. Just saying, Nintendo, I'd like to have my cartridge of it rather than having to download them separately. Just saying. Another completely out of nowhere thing, and the second best thing in the direct, or the second best game reveal of the whole presentation for me was Metopia. Now, this probably sounds like completely strange to everyone, but I love that 3DS game. For as flawed as it is, for as not like a great true RPG as it is, I think it's very fun. And I picked up the 3DS version on the last trip I went on, back in the day when you could do that in the year 2019, when Lex and I traveled off to the great state of Pennsylvania to visit some of my family over there. We went to one of the local game shops, and one of the games I picked up was I picked up Metopia, and I picked up Luigi's Mansion on the 3DS. They're both the 3DS versions. And I expected to like Luigi's Mansion a lot more. Turns out, the one I really wanted to play was Metopia, because it was a nice, simple JRPG with a lot of flaws, and I could talk about that some other time when I get the Switch version. Because I really want to get to actually talking about Pyra and Mythra here. But I'm excited for it. That is, for not wanting to pick up the Wii U ports, I'm definitely willing to pick up this 3DS port day one, even though it's also $10 more than the 3DS version. But that leads me to the best reveal of the whole thing, which is Mario Golf Super Rush. That game looks awesome. And I mean, I already talked a little bit earlier in this about how I want to do more golf. I like playing golf in real life. So the Mario sport that I gravitated to first was not Mario Tennis, it was Mario Golf. And it's just a simple 3-click golf game, like a simple series of 3-click golf. You start, power, accuracy, 1, 2, 3. But the Super Rush portion of this is really the focus of Mario Golf Super Rush doesn't appear to be on like just standard stroke play. It looks like it's going to be on speed golf, which has been a mode in every single, at least for sure, console Mario Golf game. I'm not sure if the Game Boy Color game had it. I know the Game Boy Advance Mario Golf had speed golf. But in those, it was simply finish X number of holes as quickly as possible. Now, it's a race. You are golfing and racing and running to your ball and trying to be the first one to finish the holes again, but now you have you're running and you have power-ups and it looks fun. And I am very excited for it. And that will also likely be another day one purchase, unlike Mario Tennis Aces, because again, I like Mario Tennis, but first off, I just also wasn't really in a financial situation to get it on day one, and I didn't care about it as much as I would for Mario Golf. That's all the direct-related reveals I want to talk about. So now I want to finally get to the reason that I'm actually doing this topic, which is talking about Pyra and Mythra from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 coming to Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And my goodness, one of my goals in talking about this, or in doing this today, was to be, I'm going to talk about this and at least try to release this before the character comes out. But, Sakurai just could not let that happen because they came out yesterday and the presentation was yesterday. One day, I sure hope I can talk about Smash Brothers or a Smash Brothers related topic before it is out, before the actual product is out. But maybe that destiny is just not meant to be. So to actually react to the presentation, really I think the main thesis about it that I want to talk about is, for being a pair of characters, because they're a 2-in-1 Zelda, Sheik, Samus, Zero Suit Samus from Melee and Brawl sort of deal. For being a pair of characters that I really wasn't, I really don't care for, because I have not played a Xenoblade game, or especially Xenoblade Chronicles 2, this was an awesome presentation. I was excited at first to be like, we're back in Sakurai's house. And then he had to put a downer on it because it's like, oh, the reason we're back here is because there's COVID-19 spiking in Japan. We had to do a state of emergency. And it's like, oh, well, that sucks. And I hope it gets a lot better because now I sure feel like a jerk for being excited about being back in Sakurai's house. But yeah, seriously, I hope things get a lot better in Japan. I'm sure if I looked at the numbers myself for how things are doing in Japan, I would be like, this isn't all that bad. But, I have to take myself out of my American context where we have 330 million people in this country, and they probably have like a teeny tiny fraction of that on the island nation of Japan. So, actually getting into talking about the characters, though, the significance of having Pyra and Mythra in here is it's the same significance as there was with Min Min. Character from Xenoblade Chronicles 2 was planned to be in the base version of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but the team just ran out of time. So this is essentially fulfilling that vision of now we have Xenoblade Chronicles 2 in Smash Bros., just like how we wanted to get ARMS in Smash Bros. And I think that's important. I think it's, key. It's almost a way of taking something that was unearthed in beta and actually making it real, which I think is pretty neat. And like I said, probably the most interesting aspect of Pyra and Mythra as characters is exactly that. They're this 2-in-1 character that you can switch, just like Zelda and Sheik, all the way down to the fact that you switch them out with down special, just like Zelda and Sheik in Melee and Brawl. And as far as the moveset is concerned, a lot like the last few fighters, I'm going to have a hard time breaking this down, not only because I've never played Xenoblade Chronicles 2, but also because, a lot of their main attacks are just kind of generic sword swings and just generic movements that you could have on any character. Like just, wow, I'm going to swing up for my up tilt. Well, so do a ton of other characters. But really the major two differences between Pyra and Mythra are that Mythra is fast, she's speedy, and Pyra is useful for power. But their other main differences come in their specials, and they actually both have unique final smashes as well. So I guess I just want to kind of touch on those for sure. So Pyra's neutral special is called the Flame Nova. And it's similar to Link's spin attack, and down to the point where it's like she literally spins around. And it's even so similar that it's like it causes more damage and does more it hits the character more the longer you hold down the button. Or hold down the neutral special. Mythra, for comparison, has the Lightning Buster, which is... It's very similar to Marth and Roy's neutral special. But in this case, it's a multi-slash. So kind of like, I think it's also similar to one of the Mii Sword Fighters neutral specials. Of course, for the Mii, you actually get to choose what their specials are. So it's similar to a specific one of the neutral specials for the Mii Sword Fighter, but I cannot think of the name off the top of my head. As far as side special, Pyra has a move called the Blazing End, where it's kind of weird, because the characters Pyra and Mythra are supposed to be like the spirit of the Aegis, which is the red sword in the game, but yet she gets to throw the Aegis forward, the red sword itself, and it just kind of spins in the air like Link's boomerang, but it stays in that spot until it returns after a set period of time. Of course, the problem with that Sakurai pointed out is that let's say you're coming off of the stage and you use that to prevent your opponent from hitting you in midair. Now you can't recover because you can't recover without the sword. Mythra, for comparison, has the Photon Edge, which is similar to Sephiroth's Octaslash, but in this case it's 6 slashes rather than 8. She just kind of charges forward and cha-cha-cha-cha-cha. For the up special, Pyra has a move called the Prominence Revolt, which reminded me a lot of Incineroar's Cross Chop. She essentially slashes up and goes bam down right afterward. Mythra is interesting, though, in that she has 2 up specials. I mean, they're really not 2 in practice, but they have 2 different names, and they have a slight difference depending on how long you hold the B button down. So she has the Ray of Punishment, which starts with an upward slash, just like Pyra does, but she shoots a large projectile down. And then otherwise, if you hold the button down longer, she uses Chroma Dust, which starts the same, but instead of shooting one big projectile down, she shoots down like 5 smaller ones. It was also pointed out in the direct that those moves, or Mithra's ones, I should say, can be reflected, so that's something to take into account when you're using the move. I haven't had that happen to me yet, because, like I said, since she came out yesterday, I've already had the opportunity to play these characters, just like with Sephiroth and with Steve, and, come on, Sakurai, this is the one time that I was hoping that the release date would not be the day of the presentation, and he had to do it on that day. I'm not going to cover the down special because we already talked about it. It's literally switching them out. But the most interesting piece of their moveset left are the final smashes. So Pyra uses Burning Sword, and both of these start the same for Pyra and Mythra, where they summon Rex, which is, I believe they called it their driver, is the term for it in Xenoblade Chronicles 2. He is their driver. He comes out, they slash, and in Pyra's case for Burning Sword, they create a giant fire pillar, not too dissimilar from Ken's final smash. Whereas for Mythra, she also does a similar slash, but she then rains down beams of light. It reminds me of, it's like, speaking again of the Mii Sword Fighter, their final smash is just a bunch of like slashes, and it just like sends out like a giant wave of like energy beams, and Mithra's final smash essentially does that, but it rains down rather than going forward horizontally from the Mii. And again, with a lot of these, as like Sakurai pointed out, not only are Mithra's moves faster than Pyra's, and Pyra's moves are stronger, for Mythra they're also a lot weaker, and the same holds true for the final smash. So you need to be strategic with who or which character you're using. I mean, it could just be as simple as, I prefer heavier, powerful characters, so I'll play Pyra. I prefer faster, lighter characters, so I'll play Mythra. Or you could do it the way that I've played them so far, which is, and I thought about Min Min with this as well, because one of the recommendations for playing Min Min from her presentation was, maybe you want to start, because you can't change the right arm. The right arm is always the dragon. But maybe for the left arm, you want to start matches, or just whenever your opponent or opponents are at low percentages, you want to use the Ram, but then when they get to high percentages, you want to switch that out for the Megawatt, which is a heavy slow arm. I think a similar idea would be useful for Pyra and Mythra. I've been starting as Mythra, trying whenever they get to my opponent gets to higher percentages to be Pyra, but sometimes it just works out where you KO them still as Mythra. And again, a similar idea holds here with a final smash, because the Burning Sword is intended for KOs, the Sacred Arrow is really intended for inflicting a lot of damage. Honestly, the stage to me is one of the most boring things about this Challenger Pack. Their stage is the Cloud Sea of Allrest, which, I mean, aside from like the background Xenoblade 2 characters and locations, it's really not all that exciting to me. But the stage itself is the character Azurda, who Rex calls Gramps. He's the Titan that Rex lives on. Full disclosure, I just generically wrote Titan in here, and then I did a little more research as I was writing this yesterday, and I found out that they're actually called Titans, so that was a great coincidence. But really, the only like interesting like stage aspect of it is about this stage is that Gramps, so his head is the right side of the stage, and he'll move his head into the background or into the foreground if there's something that's going by that's interesting, like one of those cameos in the background. So you have to be strategic, especially if you're off stage, to be like, oh man, I might not get back onto the stage because, I was planning on having Gramps here for me to jump onto, but now he's off looking into the background, and so now I can only jump all the way over here. So I'm screwed. But other than that, it's almost just a flat stage, so really not all that exciting. I'm honestly a little disappointed in the stage. I'm still going to play it if it ever comes up. It's not a horrible stage, but I don't find it especially exciting. for the Mii Fighter costumes. So there's only 4 for this for this challenger pack, which I find a little interesting. That's lower than normal, and similar to how I was just talking about the Titans, and I found out that they're actually called Titans in game. I was writing this yesterday, preparing to release this today, and I wrote a certain phrase, and then I watched the Maximilian Dude reaction to Pyra and Mythra last night. And when it comes to the Mii Fighter costumes, he literally says what I wrote down, which is, man, this is a Capcom smorgasbord of costumes, because all of the costumes for this pack are for Capcom characters. There were 3 Monster Hunter costumes, well, technically 2 costumes. One is a Rathalos outfit and helmet, and the other was just a generic monster, like hunter type. And then there's just the feline hat. But the other series that got represented from Capcom was Ghosts and Goblins for Arthur, because he's the hero, and he's a knight, so he would use swords. It's still only really, but a theme, actually I should point out, that continues with the Mii Fighter costumes that's a little disappointing, is that they are disappointing, because at least 2, if not 3 of these, again, are repeats from Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U. Both for sure, at least the Rathalos outfit. I'm pretty confident the Monster Hunter outfits, though, are just repeats from Smash 4. And I'm going to be honest, I'm getting a little sick of these repeats that have just been in the game to begin with. Because what was the point of me buying the new game if the DLC for the new game was going to be the same as the DLC for the old game? Nintendo and Sakurai. Just saying here, it's getting a little old. Last thing I want to talk about with this, now that, this segment has been about 45 minutes, just like the last Smash segment, is I want to go over some of the Sakurai idiosyncrasy moments. Just things that come up in it that are just fun things you learn about Masahiro Sakurai himself, just from him talking in the video. And he reminded us that aside from this trailer with Pyra and Mythra, he's written all the trailers. So every single Smash reveal you've seen so far, starting with Mega Man and Super Smash Bros. For 3DS and Wii U, all the way up to Sephiroth just now, that's Sakurai's writing. And apparently the man really knows how to make a hype-filled trailer. For being a game developer who doesn't make film, he makes some pretty darn good trailers. With feedback, I'm sure, of course, to improve on his original vision. But in this case, it was all Monolith Soft who did the Pyra and Mythra trailer in the Nintendo Direct. So hats off to them. Apparently, another idiosyncrasy of his that we learned is that he purchases a figure of each character that is in or will be in Smash Brothers to help the team understand their design, which I swear is such a Sakurai thing to do. To go that, just to do that little extra mile sort of thing, to be like, okay, we're going to add Mario to the game, and I would sure hope that there's a model of Mario lying around that we could use. No, we're not going to use that. I'm going to get a figure of Mario, and you in the modeling team are going to look at this and make sure you know exactly how to make him look in the game. That is hilarious. He even showed off his little collection of figures that he has. He has speaking of Mario, 3 or 4 Marios. You got to see the Dragon Quest 11 and the Dragon Quest 3 hero. There's Terry Bogard. Obviously, there was Cloud in there. And even he teased us so much because he's like, I really can't be in my office, but just FYI, in my office, there's a drawer that has figures of the future characters because I know who they are. So, overall, great presentation. Again, for being a character or a pair of characters that I really didn't care for the announcement or just to have be added into Smash, I was really excited by that presentation. So that should cover everything regarding Smash Brothers, regarding the Nintendo Direct. So I think it's about high time that we move into topic number 2. So we're going to be talking about the bare basics of how I would go about choosing a piece of video gaming hardware. And full disclosure, this topic is actually inspired from a conversation between myself and a former coworker of mine. She was talking with me about, like, Brandon, I think I want to try getting into gaming, but, I've never really done it before, so I want to get an idea of, like, what you'd recommend. And we talked about it, but it occurred to me, since we had a limited time and a limited forum, considering, shifts end at a certain point in the night, or during the day, whenever you're working, that I was like, man, this might make a great podcast topic, regardless of whether this individual sees it or not. It was inspired by this person, and I was thinking about it, I was like, man, I guess that would be a good topic just to, in general, tell folks my recommendations if they want to get into gaming. And I also want to clarify going into here that I am making this segment assuming that you as the listener know absolutely nothing about gaming whatsoever. If you're listening to this, you probably do know a significant amount about video games. But one tactic that I was taught to use in doing presentations and videos and the like in school was you want to assume your audience knows nothing. Because if you assume they know something and you don't define something that's important, you could end up confusing them way down the way. So a lot of this information, if you're like a gamer, even if you're like a little more casual like me, or if you're an especially hardcore gamer, this is certainly going to seem like a retread. And I want to apologize out of the gate if it seems like I'm coming off as like I'm talking down at all, because it's not what I'm going for. But there are genuinely some folks who, if I were to ask them what a controller is, that they would probably not know what it is. So I want to teach as much as possible. And I'm not going to define what a controller is, because that was just something that I pulled out of thin air. So first, I guess I want to talk, I want to lay out the options, or at least I have like a few categories that I want to talk about for systems. There are niche systems, they're streaming, not quite systems, they're streaming services. There are retro systems, there's the last generation of systems, and the next generation of systems. I guess just to make it a little more clear then, I'm really only talking about consoles and handhelds to an extent here, because PC gaming is really its own separate thing, and I feel like giving any discussion on PC gaming would only really be useful if I were doing an advanced type of discussion on how to choose hardware, because like I said, I'm intending this for folks who really don't know anything about games and electronics. So if you don't know anything about gaming or electronics, trying to do PC gaming, I feel like would be a nightmare. Even me, someone who's pretty casual, I feel like it would be a little bit of a nightmare. And I'm going to define these 5 categories: niche, streaming, retro, last gen, and next gen, along the way as they're relevant. But there are 3 terms that I was thinking about when I was writing this that I want to define right now that I'm going to use throughout. And those are exclusive games, first-party games, and third-party games. When I'm talking about an exclusive, or an exclusive game, I'll probably just say an exclusive. I'm talking about any game that is only available on one platform. And those could be first-party games or third-party games. So an example that I thought about, of a game that I really want to play that ended up being an exclusive, was Klonoa 2, Lunatea's Veil. It's a game that is exclusive to the PlayStation 2. You can only play it on the PS2. It wasn't necessarily planned to be exclusive, but it only ended up being on the PS2 in the end. When I talk about a first-party game, I am referring to a game that is developed or published by the same company that makes the hardware. So literally any Nintendo game. So if I talk about Mario, if I talk about Zelda, if I talk about Smash Brothers, Kirby, whatever else, those are all games that are only available on Nintendo platforms because they are published by Nintendo. Just for comparison, and just so I have a non-Nintendo example too, Halo is a famous first-party franchise on Xbox only. Of course, now Microsoft's making that a little more complicated since they're trying to get some of their games on Windows. Of course, Microsoft also makes Windows, so it works out. It's still in a first-party space since it's not on Mac or Linux. But I'm getting a little off track here. Generally speaking, though, if I'm talking about a first-party game, it should be exclusive. Whereas a third-party game refers to a game made by literally anyone else. And even these come with their own separate denominations. They're AAA games, which are games that are developed and published by large studios. That could be Capcom, that could be Activision, that could be Ubisoft, that could be Namco Bandai. Klonoa 2 is an example of a third-party AAA game, but that just also happens to be a PS2 exclusive. The other type are indie games, which, I mean, they're just like indie musicians in the sense that this is an independent game studio. So as far as like other like third-party games, like most third-party games end up on multiple platforms. Probably the poster boy of a AAA third-party game that ends up being on multiple platforms is the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim. Man, it really helps to be able to speak when you're doing a podcast. And I mean, that's on just about any machine known to man. Because Bethesda, well, they were a third-party developer. Now they're working with Microsoft, but that's beside the point. And like I said, an indie game can come out on just about anything. There are very, very few instances where an indie game is exclusive for any reason other than the developer just isn't interested in porting the game. So like one of my favorite indie games is Freedom Planet, and that's on PC, that's on Mac, it's on Linux, it's on PS4, it's on Wii U, and it's on Switch. It's a third-party game, but generally if you're talking about an independent game, you're going to just call it an indie game. So I hope that defines enough terms here. If there's anything that I am missing, I guarantee you that there will be an updated version of this topic in a later podcast because, the more feedback I get in understanding, like, well, where might I be missing, or what biases do I have as someone who's even, a casual hardcore gamer. What am I not addressing? What information am I addressing that might be useful that I'm just not including at the moment? With that all said, I want to go over our categories of systems. So first I want to talk about your niche options. And the two that came to mind here were the Atari VCS and the Intellivision Amico. And these are not systems that anyone's going to do any serious gaming on. And by that I don't mean that you can't do like hardcore gaming. It's just that their game selection is so limited that these two systems are not really the ones that most people are looking for. Generally speaking, I cannot think of any scenario where I could recommend these two particular consoles to someone who just wants to start getting into gaming, because they're really meant for a specific audience, and these are audiences that probably know a lot about games, or they're very, very nostalgic for a specific purpose. Like the people who wanted an Atari VCS already have the Atari VCS is the idea. And it's like kind of like a strange little PC rather than a console. Anyway, and I mean the Amico isn't even out, and I really, really highly recommend the Completely Unnecessary podcast's coverage of the Intellivision Amico. I'm sure there's a playlist out there somewhere about it, because, man, there are so many laughable aspects about that console as far as just, it was supposed to come out in, 2019 a couple of times, and it's still 2021, and they keep pushing back the release date. And the games, they're supposed to be all exclusive games or have Amico exclusive features. But in practice, we're either not seeing that come about, or if a game is exclusive, it's kind of like a laughably exclusive game, like the Intellivision remakes, because, the games that I want to play in 2021 are games that are nearly 50 years old, and basically arcade games. Nothing wrong with arcade games, but they're particular arcade games that have continued to succeed for a reason. Just in general, the game selection on those is pretty laughable, and it shares a problem with the next category I'm going to lay out, which is the Amico doesn't understand that it should be niche. Or I guess really I should say the Amico doesn't understand that it should be niche, and that is a problem it shares with one of the next options in the category I'll lay out next. So, the audience for these types of games is small. It's not non-existent, but in the case of the Amico, it's basically limited to folks who grew up with the Intellivision. So if someone came up to me and they wanted to know what piece of hardware I would recommend to them, even understanding some of their questions about asking them some questions and getting more specifics, I cannot think of a scenario where I would recommend either of these two. Your next options are streaming options. So I think everyone knows what a streaming service is. Like they've used Netflix or they've used Hulu or Spotify or whatever. It is a platform where you are letting a company's servers do the computing work for you. At least in the case of games, you're having a company's servers do their computer work for you. So the streaming services that are out there for gaming are Google Stadia and Amazon Luna. So essentially what you do for these is you're going to pay a subscription to be like, I'm going to use Google Stadia. At least if you want to get a better experience on Stadia. There is a free version, but you get very limited visual fidelity, and frame rates aren't as great on the free version. Luna is technically still not out, so I'm really not going to address that one so much, but it is an option. I just want to make people aware that it's out there. But essentially you've paid money to Google or Amazon, but you have to go ahead and still purchase the full game to stream it to your device. And that device could be your smart TV, it could be your computer, it could be your smartphone. And I already did a segment on Stadia a few episodes ago and the problems that it faces. I'd prefer really that folks check that out to get an understanding of Stadia's problems even better, but I just want to give a brief rundown in case you don't want to go ahead and listen to that at the moment. Stadia has quite a few issues, but the big ones are the games are mostly old. There are not a lot of new, truly new games on Stadia. Like I said, you have to pay a subscription, and then you still have to pay full price to get a game that you're not necessarily going to own. So just for comparison, when you get a Netflix subscription, you get access to all those movies. You don't own the movie, sure, but you only had to pay once to subscribe to the service. And probably the most important, one of the most important flaws, Google is infamous for killing many of its services, and Stadia could just as easily fall into that, because it has not taken off in the same way that other Google services like Gmail has, for example. And of course, since Stadia and Luna are streaming services, they share this final problem, which is that you need to have a strong and consistent internet connection, and most importantly with a high data cap to really be able to use these, because if you have a pretty bad internet connection, you're not just looking at a game that should be 4K looking like it's 720p, you're also looking at a game that should be running at 60 frames per second running like a slideshow. And if you're not into gaming, you might not realize why that's important, but essentially you're choosing between, if you don't have a good enough internet connection, your game might go like a doot 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 like a slideshow, but the type of game you're playing, you need it to be very smooth. Like a fighting game is a game that you want to have playing at least 60 frames per second. And the reason you need to have a high data cap, which if you don't know what that is, even if you have an unlimited internet plan, you really still in practice have a limited amount of internet you can use in a month from your internet service provider. And streaming games, since games are so big, requires a lot of data. So you need to have a very, very high cap. Otherwise, maybe if you've done a lot of playing on Luna, now when you need to go send or watch some YouTube videos, or if you want to send some emails or do whatever else, go on some Zoom calls because the world is still sick, you can't do it because you don't have any more data to use for your internet. Of course, for Stadia in particular, it hasn't exactly gotten much better because they have barely mentioned it in their Google hardware presentations. Like, I think in the last one they might have mentioned, like, hey, in our new Chromecast, it'll include Stadia, but then when the devices came out, Stadia just wasn't built into it right away. Of course, now the big controversy surrounding Google Stadia is that Google has closed their internal game development studios, so that's not a good sign for it either. And, kind of like I was talking about with the Amico, what Google doesn't understand is that Stadia has a very niche audience that just can't compete with a box under the TV. Because, like I said, you have to have a great internet connection, and you have to be willing to put up with buying games and having a subscription. And, just on top of that, you have to be willing to only get really old-ish games at this point, rather than getting newer experiences. And that's not even getting into the lack of exclusives. It's funny, on the Completely Unnecessary podcast, not to bring it up again, they were talking about Stadia and their closing down of internal studios, and Ian on the podcast was saying, this could work just fine if, Stadia played to its strength of being a streaming service by having small, mostly probably independent games, those indie games that don't require a ton of resources necessarily compared to big AAA games, right? And again, I guess I really can't critique Luna so much because it's just not out. So I really don't want to give a judgment of its services without A, having used it, like how I haven't used Stadia, and B, without seeing the official, this is how Amazon Luna is going to be. But like I can't imagine that it's going to get away from the same poor choices that Google has made with Stadia of being a streaming service that sends gigabytes and gigabytes of data to a computer, which requires great internet connection. And I just think about how expensive, actually. That's something that I didn't think about either. These are very expensive services over time, because not only do you have to pay the subscription fee, not only do you have to pay for the games at full price, again, that you don't necessarily own, you really also have to factor your internet cost into how much Stadia costs. Those are three major pieces of the puzzle. So that covers two of our categories. The next one I want to talk about is retro gaming. So when I talk about retro gaming, there's really no great definition out there for what does it mean to be a retro gamer. The way I'm thinking about it in this case is you are retro gaming if you are going to play on a system that is at least 2 console generations old. And when I say console generation, I'm talking about a set of hardware that's out for a certain amount of time. So folks will hopefully remember the Wii, PlayStation 3, and Xbox 360, and you can include the Nintendo DS and the PlayStation Portable in there as the handheld offerings during the time. That set of years where those systems were out and were basically the only new hardware, that was the 7th generation of consoles. It got succeeded by the 8th generation. That was when the Nintendo 3DS came out, the Wii U, the PlayStation 4, and Xbox One came out. That was the 8th generation. I hope that makes it kind of clear. I know it's not super clear. But essentially what I'm saying is now that we're in the 9th generation of consoles with the PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and the Nintendo Switch, that 7th generation and older, that is what I would call a retro game at this point. Plus, they're all mostly 10 years or older now. And there's a good few benefits of playing retro games. There's a low cost of entry, depending on the generation of games you're talking about and just the price of the game itself. So, like right now, Nintendo GameCube games are super expensive, not to mention the console. I guess I don't know the price of the console off the top of my head, but it's seeing a resurgence in popularity because folks who grew up with the GameCube and the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox are getting to that age. Like they're a little bit older than me, where now they're starting to get a disposable income, so they're wanting to go back and get some of those games they may have had as a child. So certain segments of it are going to be expensive. There was a time when that was true for NES games and SNES games and Sega Genesis games. That's not so much true anymore. Now those games are pretty cheap again. I mean, they're not like dirt cheap depending on the game, but they're not like expensive either. You can get a copy of, I don't know, will be a shovelware type game that you might have just happened to grow up with. Maybe you can get a copy of Wheel of Fortune on the Wii for less than $10. And if you grew up with the Wii, that's great. Now you have a little nostalgia boost there too. But a game like what's another great Wii game? Like I talked about Skyward Sword earlier in this podcast. That game isn't like super duper duper expensive. It's not cheap either. But if you want to get it, it's out there for a reasonable enough price. Another great benefit that I think people really don't talk much about with retro gaming is that there's no new games coming out, not including like homebrew and like hacks, but that's a whole separate like advanced topic for another time. So like if you want to look through the whole library of games on, I don't know, the Sega Saturn, you can look up, here's all of the Sega Saturn games, and you can find which ones are interesting to you so you know what you want to find. And you can have a general idea of how much a collection for you, of what you want to play, is going to cost. Another thing about retro gaming that's useful, or that is like a great benefit to me, is that they're retro games are just a different type of game from modern games. They might be arcadey games. They might just be short games. In the last episode, I talked about Dragon Quest 1, how for being a JRPG, it's like an 8-hour game compared to the 100-hour grind fests that RPGs can be today. That could have been bad. A lot of retro games are just iconic. I mean, Super Mario Brothers is arguably the poster child for retro gaming. If it's not Super Mario Brothers, it's probably Pac-Man. So those are like iconic games that you're going to know you're going to want to get. And I think probably the biggest boon to even going for any retro games, not just for the sake of nostalgia, is they don't have some of the bad trappings of modern games. If you want to go out and purchase a copy of Comix Zone on the Sega Genesis, you're getting the full version of Comix Zone. There's no required updates. There's no microtransactions to like hamper your progress, like to intentionally hamper your progress in the game to get you to spend money. Those are like two major things that are happening in modern gaming that retro gaming just doesn't have. The next set I would talk about are the last generation of consoles. So when I'm talking about the last generation, I think I outlined this already. This would be the PlayStation 4, the Xbox One, and the Wii U. Technically, Switch fell in between the 8th and 9th generations, but if I'm going to be honest, I consider it 9th generation hardware just to keep things clean as far as like the separation between these generations is concerned. And really the biggest benefit of going for the PS4 and the Xbox One is these games are at their cheapest. Because folks who already have the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One are trying to get rid of that console and get rid of their games because they want to have money to get the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X. So if you as someone who's just getting into gaming, could come into this and say, well, maybe I don't really need to play all the newest games at the moment, so I'll just pick up a cheap PS4 that someone's trying to get rid of and pick up a really great game for it when it's at its cheapest. And even then, that doesn't mean there aren't new games coming out for these systems. There are still new third-party games coming out for the PS4 and the Xbox One right now, despite the fact that the Xbox Series X and the PlayStation 5 are out. I mean, granted, that's partially because they just came out, so I can't really give an idea of how many more years there's still going to be new PlayStation 4 and Xbox One games that aren't like legacy sports games and the like, but and even then, they're not going to be the best versions of games necessarily, because you'll see something like maybe the newest Call of Duty is going to be cross-generation between the PS4 and the PS5, and I think I've said them enough, the Xbox One and Xbox Series X. And those last generation versions are definitely going to perform and look worse, but you're still theoretically getting the same game. okay? So you'll still get some new games on this old hardware as well. Just not the best version. And even then, something that I don't think we talk about enough is that online communities for these games are still active. Mario Kart 8 on Wii U, it certainly has fewer active players than on Switch, but you can still pretty easily get into a room on the Wii U version and be just fine and still play like a sufficient online lobby of Mario Kart 8. So online communities for older games are still active, and so you can still get that online experience too if you want. And even then, probably the greatest thing, and this kind of gets into the next category too, is that if you do decide to upgrade later on to the next generation of consoles, the PS5 and the Series X, not only will those old games on PS4 and Xbox One be backwards compatible with those systems, there's a new initiative to give you, for free of charge, a directly upgraded new version of that game for the system. So one of the things that Microsoft is doing for the Xbox Series X and S is a service called Smart Delivery. And that is a service that essentially, like, the idea is supposed to be if you buy a copy of, like, one of the first games to do this was Crash Bandicoot 4, It's About Time. If you bought Crash Bandicoot 4 on Xbox One, you pop that same disc into Xbox Series X, and lo and behold, now you have a brand new, upgraded 4K, I'm trying to remember, I don't remember if they're going for above 60 frames per second, if they're just still targeting 60 frames on it. But either way, it looks better, and you didn't have to buy another copy for the Xbox Series X. That's the idea, and I think that is brilliant. So even if you want to just cheap out right now and get some last generation games, there's still a chance that if you go ahead and get the next generation later on, you'll be able to play that same game even better. And finally, that brings us to the next generation of consoles, or now I guess they're technically the current generation of consoles. Of course, the main drawback of it is right now they are expensive. But other than that, you get a good few benefits. You're going to be receiving the most cutting-edge experience that a console can get if you're not playing on Switch. If you're playing on Switch, you get the separate benefit of getting a portable version of a game. So, but it's going to look the worst by far. Crash Bandicoot 4, like I just said, on Switch is going to look horrible compared to the PlayStation 5 version, and that's just kind of what it is. Your trade-off is you're playing it portably. The way I wrote this as far as next-gen / current-gen is, it's almost like you have a constant Christmas, because the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X just came out in November of 2020, and that means it's the start of the 9th generation. At this point, there's still at least 5 to 8 more years of new games coming out for both of those consoles, and probably about 4 to 5 more years for the Nintendo Switch as well. So you'll have access to many new games to be hyped and excited for. And really, I think one of the most interesting things is you also get first access to a ton of gaming innovations as well. And that could be, in the case of the PlayStation 5, the use of solid-state drives to basically eliminate load times. You can start using virtual reality with consoles now, at least now that it's being taken a lot more seriously by developers rather than being like a gaming niche. And of course, you get 4K visuals with potentially frame rates that are above 60 frames per second. So you'll get a really, really smooth and pretty game-playing experience. Or, of course, like I said, with Switch, too, you get the benefit that you have portable, full-sized console games coming out to play as well. So, last thing I want to talk about with this is, as far as what I would actually recommend to a beginner for what system or what category type of system I would recommend to them, it's going to come down to questions that I ask them. So if they say, well, I really just want to play these specific games. Well, if you want to play Zelda, you have to have a Nintendo console. If you just want to play third-party games, yeah, you might be able to get by just fine on an Xbox or a PlayStation. Okay, well, I really don't care about how great games look. Okay, well then maybe If you want to go for something a little different, you'll go the retro console. Because then you can play completely different experiences. And even then, you don't have to get the original hardware. You could go for an aftermarket, like Hyperkin sort of deal as well. Well, but I still want to play new games, too, to an extent. Well, then that'll be a great reason to pick up the last generation. See, all of those little questions are going to determine what actually gets recommended to you. But I think the point of this segment here was to give like a general breakdown of what each like category of hardware is. So again, expect an updated version of this at some point in the future with more information, better, clear definitions, hopefully. I'm hoping this has been useful to some folks out there, but I really want to see feedback on it for sure. And now I need to take a very brief drink break because, man, my voice is hurting. Ugh. Okay. That's better. Let's get into our third topic. So, for this recurring segment of the best and worst of board games, I want to talk about one board game that I consider to be one of the worst board games out there, and that is Sorry. And I'm sure hoping that I don't really need to define Sorry so much, because I'm sure every person listening to this show has played at least one board game in their lifetime. And if you've not played a board game in your lifetime, that probably means you're too young to be listening to this show. I try to keep it family friendly, but if you haven't played a board game, something tells me you're like 3 years old or younger, and that's a problem. You should not be listening to this right now. Anyway, but let's talk about Sorry. So, I guess to be consistent with what I said earlier, where you have to assume your audience knows nothing, I'll give the basics of Sorry. Cue B-roll. This might be helpful here. If not, it'll just be somewhere else. So in the game of Sorry, you play as a team of 4 colored pawns, red, blue, green, or yellow. And you start in this start area, and your goal is to get back to the home that is directly next to you. But of course, the problem with that is you can only go one way around the board, and that just so happens to be the long way. The way that you do that is by pulling cards with numbers on them. But to get out of the start area, you have to pull either a 1 or a 2 or a Sorry card. If you pull a 1, you get to go forward 1 space. If you pull a 2, you get to go forward 2 spaces, and you get the bonus of getting to draw another card. If you draw a Sorry, you get to take one of your pawns from the start and eliminate a pawn that is already out on the board that is another color, and they get to go back to start. Now, there are a lot of other cards in the game that range from 1 to 12. I think, if I remember correctly, there's no 6 card. Keep in mind, I am going based on the version of Sorry that my family owns, which is from like the 70s or the 80s, so to be fair, some of these rules might be a little teeny bit different, but I don't think they're all that different. But each card usually has some kind of unique rule to it, and if it doesn't, it's just go forward X number of spaces. Like the 8 card, you can go forward 8. Like I said, other ones have unique rules. Like the 2 card, like I said, lets you draw again. If you draw 4, instead of being able to go forward 4, you have to go backward 4. It's that sort of deal. And the first player who gets all 4 of their pawns from start into home wins the game. That is the basics of Sorry. Now let me get into my problems with Sorry. I have a lot of problems with this game. I really don't like it. And the big thing that it comes down to is Sorry is all luck-based. Now, it's not, I guess, I really shouldn't say it's all luck-based. It's not as bad as Candyland, which one of my teachers pointed out to me, the problem with Candyland and how it is actually entirely luck-based, which is you're just pulling cards and hoping you pull the color on the card that you need. If you haven't played Candyland, again, you are probably way too young to be listening to this, because Candyland is a beginner's game for little children. And I'll talk about Candyland another time and how bad of a game it is objectively, even if I have nostalgia for it. But in Sorry, it has the same problem that Candyland has, in that you are almost entirely, at the mercy of the cards. if you're pulling cards and you go through a whole deck and you never draw a 1, a 2, or a sorry, or maybe you are lucky enough to draw a sorry, but you're unlucky enough to not have someone else on the board to use it on, that was a whole deck of cards you went through without being able to do anything. Or maybe you're that lucky player who just so happens to get a ton of 11s and sorries for when your pawns are in the start, and you just get into the end very quickly. I have genuinely seen it where, because the way my family likes to do it just for funsies is at the end, after the first player is won, they'll let the next players keep continuing to see who gets second, and like whoever's the last one will still just keep going. I have genuinely seen it where if I am the last person to go out, or if my sister was, or my father was, or my mom was, or whoever else could be playing at the moment, where they can go through a full deck of cards multiple times and still, even without having to deal with other players drawing cards in the middle, not get their last pawns in home. That is how luck-based Sorry is, where you could be the only one playing and still take forever to get into home. And not to mention, you have to deal with what other players are going to do as far as their strategic choices. So I brought up the 11 card. With 11, you can either go forward 11 spaces, or you can swap any two pawns of different colors on the board. So maybe someone is really close to getting one of their pawns in home, and it's like their last one, and you want to prevent them from doing that. You can switch one of yours, even though it might not be advantageous to you, so that they don't get into home and win the game. Or ideally, like what probably happens the most is there's someone who's really close to your home and you're far away from home, and so you swap them and now you're close to home. But if you're the person on the receiving end of that, now you have to deal with fixing that and getting yourself back to home. And oh, look at that. Now you got sorry done, you're back in start and have to hope you draw a 1 or 2 or sorry. Too much luck. Not to mention, actually, this is something I can't believe I didn't write about in here, and as far as it being luck-based, you have to get the exact amount to get into home. So if you're 3 spaces away from getting into home and you're in the safety zone, trust me, I swear there will be footage of this. If you're 3 spaces away, you need to hope and pray that you either draw a 3, or if you're lucky enough to draw a 2, then you draw a 1. Or, maybe instead you'll get sent back and back and back with 4s over and over again. I'm sorry I'm getting so worked up. I don't like this game. And not to mention, one of my main problems with Sorry is there's already a superior version of Sorry, and it came out before Sorry, and it's called Pachisi. Otherwise, you might know it as Ludo, and you can play it in the Creative Outlet Podcast official 2020 release of the year Clubhouse Games 51 Worldwide Classics. This is not a paid endorsement. I just really like the game. And really the main difference between... well, actually, there's a couple differences between Sorry and Pachisi or Ludo. So first off, for that, it's similar to Sorry. You have to roll a 6 to be able to get one of your pawns out from the start. There's also only one line you can go on, but there's nothing that you can... So first off, to clarify, you do this by rolling. You play Ludo by rolling a die rather than drawing cards. So as long as you have a pawn out, you're guaranteed to be able to go forward, which is great. And there's nothing that's out. There are no numbers you can draw that will automatically make someone have to go back to start. But if you are lucky enough to say, like, you have someone who's 4 spaces in front of you and you roll a 4, yes, you will send that pawn back to start, that other player's pawn. It does retain the same problem of Sorry, where you have to roll the exact amount to get into the home. I guess technically that's a rule you can choose to follow or not, but traditionally, if you play Ludo, you're supposed to, if you get one of them into a home, one of your pawns into a home space, to be able to get the rest in, you need to move that one 3 spaces forward. That's the idea. And just from an objective standpoint, though, when it comes to Sorry, I think I've covered about all I need to do with Ludo. There might be some Clubhouse footage there of it. I don't know yet. The game design for Sorry is it's boring. The story is bland. Okay, you need to get some guys home. Wow, I've never heard a story about that before. And there's more or less no aesthetic. I mean, some versions of Sorry try to spice it up by, like on the box, making the pawns have faces, even though in game they won't have faces, and they like make it all like looking modern and bubbly and stuff. But there's really no aesthetic to it. It's just pawns on a board with a bunch of squares going around it, and you have to get to the end. And here's the thing. I think I talked about in Clubhouse games, or at least I've talked about in my other game reviews too. This is not a traditional review. This is just me ranting about a terrible game. These aspects of not really having a story and having a bland aesthetic would not be bad necessarily, because games like chess and checkers have those exact same problems, but they work for the game because the game is fun. Sorry is not fun. If you're winning, maybe it's fun. Otherwise, it's really not that fun. Anyway, that was just a nice, fun, short topic. I like having short topics sometimes in here. Talking about terrible, terrible non-video games. So expect to see some of the best and worst of board games coming up. Again, I think that covers what I wanted to tell you that I was angry about with Sorry. If I think of any more, you can certainly hear about it in the intro of the Creative Outlet Podcast, episode 9, I'm sure. But I think it's about time we get to the final topic and get close to wrapping this show up. So the last thing I wanted to talk about here is my first record, or rather I should say my new small record collection. I never really intended on getting a vinyl collection. Unless you're really super into music, I don't think anyone really intends on starting a record collection. Other than that exception I just gave, which is that you're really into music and you want to play vinyl, but I'm getting way off track here. I ended up purchasing my first record from the good old folks at Fangamer, because over the holidays they were having a sale, or actually, this might have been their last chance sale. They have they have constant sale for items that are like, we're not going to be making this item anymore. And one of those items that they had on there was the soundtrack for Mother. That's the prequel to Earthbound, now known as Earthbound Beginnings here in the West. And the reason I wanted it is because the Mother soundtrack is actually really unique in that despite the fact that it's for an 8-bit Famicom/NES game, all the tracks are actually professionally recorded vocal tracks on side A. On side B, they're all the 8-bit tracks. So I just kind of got lucky in that I was like, oh man, I've wanted this soundtrack. It's on vinyl. Now I guess I have to get a record player. So after that, I just kind of started buying more and more and more records until I have this like small 10-ish record collection. As far as what I have, there should be footage of this here too. You won't be able to see it. I have the Angry Video Game Nerd 1 and 2 Deluxe vinyl soundtrack. But the problem that I faced with that was when I had it sent to me from Ship to Shore Phono Company and opened the shrink wrap sealed record, there was no record in it for sides A and B. So if you don't know how records work, and I've learned this myself, when you have multiple LPs or vinyls or records, whatever term you want to use for it, in an album, the first one gets labeled side A and side B, and the second one is side C and side D, and so on, depending on how many are in there. Basically, it's just the same as saying, like, this is record 1, side 1. Kind of like you'd have in a cassette, I guess, because I think those had sides A and B as well. But I was missing the entire first record, so that won't be pictured, and I'm going to be getting a new copy, hopefully sent to me soon, because I returned it to them, to the fine folks at Ship to Shore, and explained the whole problem to them. We'll see what happens. And then I got Banjo-Kazooie pretty recently. That one's a big soundtrack. That one has 4 LPs in it. God, I don't know why I'm trying to think of all the ones I have off the top of my head, but you'll see them in footage. I know I have Klonoa, Door to Phantomile. That might have been the one that sparked this whole interest, because I think I found that one first, and then Mother happened to just be on sale. Let's see, I know I have Wilmot's Warehouse. That's a game that Lex really likes. Actually, I think she was technically the one who wanted that. I know I have Golf Story. That's a pretty good soundtrack. Very calming soundtrack. I have Untitled Goose Game, and the fun thing about that LP is that I believe I got mine in orange, but they make that vinyl out of all recycled vinyl from IM8-bit. So you'll get a completely different color from what I'll get, and a completely different color from what someone else get. I have Mother 1 and I have Mother 2. Obviously, I already talked about Mother, now I have Mother 2 to go with it. I don't know. You'll be able to see a bunch of the ones there in the footage. And I've listened to just about all of them, and they're all, I mean, people talk about records having like the cleanest sound, and I really can't judge that well, I guess, because the player that I have is a generic cheapo, and I mean like cheaper than, or about the same price as some of the records themselves, a Victrola suitcase-style Bluetooth record player. And the thing that I've learned about it is that it seems like these aren't really what you want to have for a serious record collection. Again, kind of, funnily enough, kind of like the intro to gaming topic I did. I'm on the receiving end of learning, like introducing myself to vinyl here. And essentially what I've learned is this is like a sort of stopgap type of player for me. Like, this is like, it works for now. You really don't want to use this in the long term, because people have said that it supposedly, quote unquote, eats up your vinyls or your records. But it sounds like the real evidence on that is a little bit more mixed than some audiophiles are willing to tell you. But yeah, I mean, again, kind of like with the Amiibo, when I have my own place, I'm hoping to get a better player than what I have, because hopefully I'll have more money for a better player. And it just kind of works for now. Just kind of like how hanging these up here works for now. I just can't, I just want to keep them safe until I can officially take them home to what will be my home that I own or I rent and use them. But I haven't really had many problems. Apparently, there's also some issues with like low tones with it as well, or like low pitch sounds in music that it like skips some of it. I haven't really observed this much, but I'll have to see what happens. And I'm really wondering like how big my collection's gonna end up being. I'm at about 10 already, which is shocking. I never thought I'd have one, let alone 10. And really, the size of my collection depends on how much game music comes out on vinyl, because I don't really listen to much music as far as conventional music that gets played on the radio, or even like, independent stuff. I don't follow music. That's just a me problem. So it just depends on like, hey, there's plans from Ship to Shore that there's going to be some Capcom soundtracks this year. Is there going to be a certain attorney that's getting some music out? Because I will tell you right now, if I hear that there will be a vinyl version of the orchestra soundtracks from Ace Attorney that have been done from 2008 and 2015, either one, I don't care which one, I will be buying that day one, because I've wanted that soundtrack forever. Or like the jazz one, or the piano one, or even just the plain Jane soundtracks from Phoenix Wright, Ace Attorney, any one of those games. I'll be snapping those up for sure. I know if you looked at the footage, there should be, or the B-roll I should say, there should be one non-video game vinyl in there from Panic at the Disco. That's Lex's. She wanted a record for it as well, because we paid for it together, and that's fine. I'm sure any non-game vinyl probably isn't going to be mine. So let's see. otherwise, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to play with it much because I don't have it here. I have it at her place. So hopefully, again, once I or we have a place of our own, maybe I'll be able to play it more. Or maybe, worst case scenario, I have to get my own for my own place. That all just depends on how relationships go. Not that I want to be a pessimist about it, because that would be horrible, but I also have to be realistic. I have to be, I have to be open to any and all conclusions. And really the thing that I'm most curious about with this still is, it sounds like maintaining a collection like this is going to be a hassle. At least as far as, I have to, if I really want to have a, strong collection, or maybe it's not so much with the collection, have a good player, I have to change the needle every so often. I have to make sure that it is properly calibrated and aligned so that when you have the needle on the outside, it goes on the same, a proper arc, so that it's not scratching up one side of the sound waves in the, God, I really should not have been sitting like that. One side of the track more than another. So we'll just have to see what happens there. I'm trying to remember what else. I watched some of the intro level stuff. Of course, I have to get a better player itself. And it sounds like it's important to keep your records clean, which, I mean, of course you should keep everything clean, but I'd have to do special effort to clean these, just like I have to go through special effort of cleaning cartridge games as far as using rubbing alcohol and a Q-tip and all that sort of stuff. So it's just fun. I'm really curious to see what is going to happen in the future of this new collection, because, like I said, it was never something I intended on getting. I guess if I, were ever in a place where I was in financial straits and had to get rid of something, that would probably be one of the first ones I would get rid of, because, like I said, it wasn't something I ever intended on necessarily getting in the first place. So, but what can you do? That's the fun of getting into a new experience and trying something that you weren't necessarily certain you would be passionate about. But I'm excited for it. I like game music. I would like to actually have physical copies of game music rather than just listening to MP3s. And if vinyl's the way I'm gonna listen to it, vinyl's gonna be the way I'm gonna listen to it, and that should be fun. If I can get Ace Attorney vinyls, and if I can get a Freedom Planet vinyl, just saying, or Super Mario Odyssey vinyl, oh, that'd be fantastic. I would love to listen to those whenever I'm in the mood for some music. But that should cover all 4 topics for today's Creative Outlet podcast. This one actually came out the teeniest bit shorter than the latest ones. We're looking at about an hour and 45 minutes. I'm glad to be back here doing this. I've been thinking about it for the last week and a half. Man, I really wish I could record something, and lo and behold, look what I did. I recorded something. So please, as always, do your typical form of engagement depending on your platform. That could be a like, that could be a subscription, that could be a thumbs up. I'm not sure exactly what all the audio platforms let you do. Share this show out to other people who you may think are interested in listening to me. If you're on anchor.fm/THECOP, you can always send me a voice message. I have not quite figured out how I would be able to incorporate these into the show yet, but I'm going to try. I may have to get a mixing board, worst case scenario, to mix in audio from the mic and from the computer. I'm not certain yet. That's going to be a fun thing to learn about. But either way, I look forward to pretending to see everyone in the next episode of the Creative Outlet Podcast. This is Brandon Pudwill signing out, and thank you much again for listening today.